So, welcome to the Mexico panel. This has been something that's really developed over the past year. Last April, we hosted an online event which connected 30 Mexican music professionals with about 30 from Scotland and Wales. So we did that with our friends at Focus Wales. And what happened with that was it led to me being invited to attend two events in Mexico, the Marvin Festival in Mexico City and FIMPRO, which is the biggest music convention there, which also has a really nice showcase component. So Marvin's in Mexico City. It's a multi-venue festival with a conference that has thousands of viewers on their Amazon Music channel, and FIMPRO is a big international event in Guadalajara, which is where Anna here is from. That then led to me talking to the Department for Business and Trade, formerly known as the DIT, and they then supported this session and the whole Mexican and Canadian strand. So it's been a nice evolution. We've managed to assemble an illustrious cast in person, but also in Zoom. So Malfi Dorantes is joining us here. I don't know what you can see, Malfi, or maybe just turn around and give you a wave. And Malfi managed all the Mexican side of our online exchange last year. So the idea with this is to give you a bit of a overview of the market. If you've got questions, you can ask questions. And yeah, I think what I'll do is ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Malfi, why don't you go first? Because you're furthest away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm furthest away, but I'm closest to your heart, to everyone's heart. So it's all good. I'm Malfi Dorantes. I own a PR agency called MalfiCo. And we've been working not only in the Mexicanization of foreign projects so they can have a strategic and successful development in Mexico, but we also work with a lot of trade missions and trade offices to make sure that we connect the right people outside and inside of Mexico. So that's me.
Thank you. Sos, do you want to go next?
Hello, I'm Sos Melgarejo. For the last 2 years, I'm running a record store in Mexico City. It was a nice experience to know how the vinyl record market is still growing and is having a good acceptance with young people. So I would like to let you a feeling about how is the vinyl market record having a very good acceptance in Mexico City mainly and other parts of Mexico.
Anna.
Hola, I'm Ana Rodríguez. I am most of my time a manager. I manage a band called Trocker. I've been doing that for 19 years. And since 2020, I started a company along with two of my best friends. One is a music producer. The other one is the director of the Feria Internacional de la Música, the one that Olaf mentioned that is held in Guadalajara. And we started a company to do research on the music market for Mexico and Latin America with special focus on Colombia. We did publish the first industry report last year. We're starting on the new one this month. We're also writing a new report on Medellin. And we also initiate a collective project, which the first thing that we did was to put together a rescue fund for musicians, crew, and managers during the pandemic. I think that's it, because I can keep talking.
Leyla.
Hi, my name is Leyla Flores. I am a founder and music supervisor at Loud Music Brokers. I've been in the music business for almost 15 years now, and 10 with Loud. We are specialized in music supervision for advertising and also films, documentaries, TV shows, and we make also we compose and we make arrangements.
Philipp.
Yeah, I'm the only blonde Mexican on the panel. No, I'm actually not Mexican. I'm German. I'm a bit of an anomaly, maybe. I run a festival called WISE. It's a conference slash festival on the intersection of music, art, technology, which will happen in Berlin next month on May 11, 12. I started that actually in China in 2018 because I was living in China for 10 years. Booking bands there and managing Chinese bands and being a promoter and also running a small label. And my connection to Mexico actually started with my studies. I studied Latin American studies a long time ago and was in San Diego, which is next to Tijuana. And then I always went down to Tijuana and experienced especially the electronic scene there. And just last year, I led the first European-funded music trade mission, which went to Mexico. So I was in Mexico 4 times within the last year, and Malfi also helped putting things together over there. Yeah, that's it for the moment. Yeah, and fun fact, I was also once upon a time the intern of the U.S. ambassador, ex-U.S. ambassador to Mexico.
That's a fun fact. Yeah, actually, I should have mentioned my Mexican connection. I went out there many years ago as an exchange student when big concerts were still banned because they thought it was going to result in civil unrest. And in the first month connected with a bunch of middle-class punks who adopted me and thought I was really exotic because I knew one of the Exploited. And that was a good start. I then went back a few years later and worked on an English language newspaper called the Mexico City Times and covered quite a lot of emerging Mexican artists that are still around today in one form or another, such as Molotov and Plastilina Mosh and Control Machete. I think they fell out with each other, but anyway, they're all still active musically. And I was the first person to write about the Mexican club scene way back in 1996 for DJ Magazine. So I've kind of kept my connections there, and that's why when I realized that countries like Sweden and Austria were looking at Mexico as an export market, I thought we should do the same in Scotland. And as we had a bit of support to also bring our Welsh friends on board, that's how the digital initiative started. And I got knocked back for his trade mission, so I went and did my own one instead, and it wasn't his fault. But I wasn't selected. I think wrong country and wrong age bracket. But anyway, I think it's a really interesting market. There are some things which we've got a bit of a summary from Anna, which gives us a bit of an insight. It's quite a big presentation, so I think we'll just go through the first 3 because I think we have such a great panel here. It's more interesting to hear from them, and then you can look at the summary which Anna's made. Is this the one that I owe you money for, by the way? Because it's the translation, yeah? Okay, I'll sort you out. Don't worry. So if, we get this.
So because that's the report that we put together last year. Our mainly data information comes from IFPI, obviously. For live music, it's kind of a challenge. We do have a huge industry for Mexican regional music that works under its own terms, basically cash at the door. So it's practically impossible for us to track that. We're trying to bring them into the conversation so we can get the information to really measure the size of our live music market. But we'll see if this changes. Yeah, there. Okay, so this is a characterization of the market. Mexico is a republic with 31 states, being the federal district Mexico City. I think here the important part is, I'm sorry, the most important cities in terms of music are the ones that you can see on yellow. I hope you see them. Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. But there are other cities that are producing music and structuring their local industry. Tijuana, there's one that it was mentioned already with the electronic scene, I think is the most iconic city for electronic music. Then is Hermosillo, which is something new, mostly for Mexican regional music, but also hip hop. Aguascalientes, which happens to be a city with a lot of funding for public festivals, but a lot of funding. And it's between Mexico City and Guadalajara. That's what makes that city, Aguascalientes, important. Also Querétaro, it's a city with a big rock scene. And Puebla, which is also really close to Mexico City. Population, that is crazy. We are 130 million.
Man, you like breeding. It was only 90 million when I was first there.
See? Ask the people who live in Mexico City how they do it.
I don't know. On the metro?
On the metro, exactly.
The back carriage of the metro.
Exactly. So we are over 130 million people with the average age of 29 years old. So there is a lot of young people there. Mexican diaspora in the States is extraordinary. It's 36 million just in the States. LA is the second largest city of Mexico, which is not in our country. I don't know why, but yeah. That's
used to belong to you.
Yeah, it used to, until it was sold. The border, it's more than 3,000 kilometers. San Diego, already mentioned. That's something that I've been talking to artists here. If you get yourself a tour within the West Coast of the States, it's easy to cross to Tijuana. If you do, for example, South by Southwest, it's easy to get to Monterrey. Monterrey is one of the biggest music cities in Mexico. So yeah, we have several points within the border that can help you to do binational tours. And then there's other data in the bottom that I will just quick mention. Mexico is the third largest country in Latin America. It's the seventh country with the greatest linguistic diversity in the world. So right now with hip hop, we do have a lot of bilingual projects doing native language and Spanish. It's the 11th most populated country in the world and the 13th largest country in the world. So when you go touring in Mexico, you have to look at the map because you won't be able to do it by car. The biggest circuit is the one in the middle between Guadalajara and Mexico City. If you have a show in Guadalajara and then you want to do a show in Monterrey or Tijuana, you have to fly. You know, and all those things are things to consider when you are preparing a tour. So I think we're gonna. Okay, I'm just gonna go really fast about this.
We can share all this with you afterwards as well. So
yeah,
this is just to give you an overview.
Totally. Yeah, we can do. I think this is the only thing that I will say. Well, you have the most, the social media that I use the most. Still, we have, Facebook on top. And then the number of Mexicans that use intelligent phones, it's impressive. Like, I think talking about marketing, that we can go back to Malfi for that.
Yeah.
Everything that can be on the phone, it's the most important part. And amigo, okay, so there. I think that's where you guys can jump in Sos and Leyla, about recorded music market. Huge. Globally, 2022, it was almost $26 billion. Mexico, the market, it's 284 million. And LATAM, for the first time last year, he hit the $1 billion market. Guess who plays a big role on that? Mexico. Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil are the most important markets from the region. Also, Mexico, so if we talk about the 5 countries that use short video format the most, 3 of them are Latin America. Mexico, it's the most important of them, using short format video to promote music in Mexico. It's really important. You want to jump in on this one?
So I think it's maybe worth mentioning as well that this is a recorded music market. Mexico's always been a really big consumer of recorded music. The only problem if you were an artist or a record company was that the vast majority was pirated. So they had this huge market for pirated CDs. They even had a kind of pirate Grammy to award the prize for the most pirated artist. But someone from the IFPI about 20 odd years ago told me that it was something crazy like 3/4 of sales, in fact maybe even more, maybe 80% was actually pirated. They'd have vans that would go from one record shop to the other, reproducing CDs to drop off. So then Napster hit, and Napster in some countries was an expensive phone call because while your album downloaded overnight, you paid by the minute. Not in Mexico, it was a flat rate call, so it was a really good place to download an album overnight. So, it was this kind of double whammy. So one of the things when people complain about Spotify, and one of the stories that Spotify's been really bad at telling is that they pretty much substituted piracy in Mexico, and that was that initial mission statement from Daniel Ek, wasn't it? And I think Mexico is a really good case study in that. It also has got this huge Spotify penetration because everyone spends ages in their car or on the metro going to work. So, yeah.
The market share for Spotify in Mexico is over 87%, something like that. It's just nuts.
And it is one of the places where, it is, I think it's the first. Malfi, you can tell us, you know this off the top of your head, but it is... Malfi, are you there? Could you put Malfi on? Yes, excellent. What is it with Spotify in Mexico? It is the most, it's the highest penetration, isn't it, in the world, in Mexico City?
Yes, Mexico City is the highest penetration. I always make the joke in these types of things where I'm going to do a t-shirt that says, my band has Mexico in its top 5, and it's like every single band in the world has Mexico in their top 5. So it is an interesting number, and everyone gets overwhelmed by that number, I guess. But statistically, it's obvious, and it has to do with the amount of people that are listening to the songs, but also it's the amount of people that are just go to the playlists and end up around your songs. It's not a captive audience. So I always say after saying this number and this fact that doesn't actually mean anything for the band. It means something if your streaming strategy is based on growth in Mexico and you are focusing on that number, but it actually doesn't mean anything that you have Mexico in your top countries. And India actually is getting really, really, really close to Mexico because they just recently have opened Spotify like 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. So they're getting really, really close to us, and I'm going to hate when we lose our first.
I think they were waiting for 5 years to get it like just where Mexico is, something like that. Like that's the projection. So, yeah, it might happen earlier.
So we're talking about recorded music at the moment, the different ways that works in Mexico. One of our partners in the exchange last year was La Roma Records, which was a vinyl record shop opened by a friend of mine over a decade ago. And just when the vinyl started to take off again, and it's boomed. He's opened a second shop in Mexico City last year. He's got a joint venture in Bogota as well, and he's got a label. And I think what really hit me when I was last over there in the space of 4 years, and taking into the consideration the pandemic as well, there's just been this explosion of shops, and Sos is one of them. Who's buying records? What's it like, and how do you get vinyl into your shop?
Okay. Well, my vinyl record is specialized in new records. We don't sell used records because we think the experience on unboxing and la disponibilidad, the availability of have new records is easy to import. I bring records from Europe, from United States, from different size of distributors. So they are repressing many iconic records like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. They are arriving with a good price. So people is enjoying to have. I think there are a new market with the new records, different the collectors markets that is looking for first impression of limited editions in the past. So the main people is looking for new records is young people around 25 to 35 years. Is people who is loving to have to unbox and records. They make TikTok with unboxing their records to show people how to open. And there are some people very younger, the Zeta generation, about 19 years old, that is a very curious data that they say that half of them who are buying records don't have a turntable. They buy the records because they love the artist, they are fan of that artist, and they want an object like a souvenir, but they still don't have a turntable, no? So it's very strange that, but they have the music in the Spotify. And maybe in the future they are going to buy a turntable or something to listen that. But this is a very curious data from the market. They are also clients like my generation that they always listen to records, so they like to see what's new. Maybe they like something classic or a new music, but the most people is concentrated in young people, about 25 to 35, and look for new music as well as classic music, no? People of 18, 20 asking for Led Zeppelin, asking for...
Tell me, how do people that I can see there's a couple of people with labels here, how would they get music into your shop? Can they approach you directly, or does it have to be done through a distributor?
Well, I work with... ¿Quiénes son mis principales distribuidores?
No,
¿Pueden dar la música directamente a una disquera o tiene que ser a través de una distribuidora?
No, well, if I can get directly for our label record, it's great for me. I work with distributors. They have a lot of labels in their catalog, but I have no problem to deal with a record label and import directly from them their records. For me, that will be nice, no?
So there you go, Andy in the audience. He's got a label, and it's really good. What genres do you stock? Do you have everything?
Yes, mainly is rock, alternative rock. I think 80% is music in English, or maybe more, 90%, because music in Spanish is... I don't have CDs. I only set vinyls. So groups who son in Spanish, like Mexican, Argentine. Bueno, Argentinians have a lot. Spanish. record most in CDs, but they are starting to record in vinyls. So it's slowly, but we are having Plastilina Mosh repress, for example, their vinyl few months ago. Café Tacuba, they didn't have a vinyl, and they repressed one of them.
So I think to suffice to say that if you're recording in English, then it's fine with his shop. If you're recording in Spanish, I can recommend some of the stock Spanish language things as well. And I think there are shops that specialize more in different genres, and there are a lot of places as well. Actually, even street vendors dealing a lot in second-hand vinyl. So it's really vibrant for physical product in Mexico. And
there's like around 120 record stores in the country.
So 120 is impressive if you think about it. And that's with the main chain mix-up kind of declined really. So this is kind of like similar to here, where you've had a whole load of shops opening up in the past few years, but the big ones have all closed down. So I think that it's also worth mentioning that record shops tend to do in stores. If a band's visiting or you want that promotional opportunity, it's a really good opportunity to connect. And there is a really good network. Malfi, do you have a point to make there? Or
yeah, we actually had the listening party for the Young Fathers album when it arrived to Mexico. And it did really well. So if you find the right spot for your distribution and you have a cool team around the shops, which I'm sure everyone will agree with me here that all the shops in Mexico have really cool people involved, it's a good opportunity to think about what you also can do in long distance. So it's a good offline up that you can do without going to Mexico also.
And I think that, Young Malfi's doing Young Fathers Press, which is really cool, because they're from Edinburgh as well, where we are right now. And I want to come on to the sync opportunities, because obviously Mexico is a bit of a superpower when it comes to soap operas. It also has a very vibrant film industry. What opportunities are there, Leyla, in terms of artists and composers from outside Mexico?
I think it's a very big opportunity because, as we were mentioning before the panel, most of the music that is used to sing in Mexico is in English. So we use a lot of music in English, more than 80%. It's very aspirational, especially for advertising. In my whole career, it's just like 5% of the music I've sung in my life is in Spanish. So all of it is in English, especially, as I said, for advertising, also for movies. We use a lot of music in English, and sometimes other languages like French or instrumental or electronic music, but it's mainly in English with lyrics. And Netflix is growing very fast in the whole world, as you know. So now we're having productions in-house. Because in the past we depend on the big ones, and now Netflix is investing a lot of money in Mexico to make our own productions. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So it's growing very, very fast.
And tell me, how much I know that if you're making music for, let's say, the English-speaking market, for adverts, for example, or also for some TV things, the lyrics are, there's certain things with lyrics are a bit sad or depressing, then they won't get used, and they certainly won't get used if they're swearing. I remember listening to the radio in Mexico, and I was like, God, this is amazing. They don't care. They're allowing, you've got people on daytime radio interviewed in English who are just swearing non-stop, where they'd just be kicked off the air here. How is that? How conscious do people need to be about lyrics if they're singing in English in Mexico? Is that a big consideration, or are you a bit more relaxed about it?
In movies, I think it doesn't really matter, because it depends on the scene and so many things. But in advertising, you wouldn't be singing. I've sing this artist, Sophie Tucker. And we need to receive the clear version, without the shit and without all those words, because you can be sued. Like it's you cannot do that. No. So for movies, documentaries, TV shows, it really doesn't matter.
And I mean, what kind of figures are you talking about? I mean, if there was I know it's really hard to quantify, but for a sync, what kind of money could people expect if they were successful?
For movies, I mean, it depends on the level, let's say level of the artist, because if it's a very well-known artist, you have
of course.
So I'll say some examples. So if it's like someone that is emerging for a movie scene, you can maybe earn, I don't know, like let's say $3,000. Both rights for publishing and master right for a background scene, like background vocal scene. If it's a main title, maybe you can ask for, I don't know, like $6,000 US for the main title for both rights. But if you are very famous, you can, if you're very, very, very famous, you can ask whatever you want, right? Because you are super famous, like the Rolling Stones. Like, I just placed a song for an advertise. This is the first one in my whole career I ever heard of anyone that plays, and I say it with humbleness and gratitude, for $1 million. So for advertising, it was, I don't remember, it was 6 months or 12 months for a PepsiCo, a very big brand. So if you're very famous, you can ask for whatever you want. But regular, if it's an advertisement that you're doing, let's say 6 months, Mexico, all media, a decent amount will be, if you are kind of well known, you will ask for $50,000, no?
Okay, so it's a good benchmark to have. So I think that there's no one mega famous in here yet, but they're quite famous for us. But these guys at the front, Swiss Portrait, have had quite a few things synced. So speak to them afterwards, because you have all the rights as well, don't you? So you're ready to go. So I think that's really interesting. There is also obviously the live area to think about, and you've already alluded to it, Anna. And obviously there's 3 really big cities in Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. And Monterrey's the closest to the US border, and then I guess on the other side you've got Tijuana. So I mean, if you were going to play live in Mexico, or you were, for example, invited to showcase or do a show in Mexico City, what would you say people's next move should be? And how would you really make the most of that opportunity? I guess, start with Philipp and Malfi. I mean, you've got an overview of that, haven't you? I mean, Malfi, do you want to start? You're nodding vigorously there, and then I'll bring Philipp in after that.
No, I actually was going to say that Philipp is more of an expert in the live scene in Mexico than me. So that tells you how valuable. Go for it, Philipp. Yeah.
What's your experience?
I mean, to be honest, I mean, I brought after the trade mission, I brought one artist over to Mexico City to Marvin a festival called Ava Vegas, kind of like as a bit of a test balloon to see like how this whole thing works, right? And she only played Mexico City. We had like the opportunity with Marvin to go to other cities, but because of scheduling or whatever, she didn't do it. But from what I heard, what everybody told me in our interviews that we did on the ground is like, yes, obviously Mexico City is very important, Guadalajara is very important, Monterrey, and then of course you also have to see what are touring routes, like how do you go from one city to another. In that case, what Marvin offered was actually, traditional, like going with a van, like on tour. So it was driving distance, right? But of course, if you want to go from Mexico City to Tijuana, I mean, hey, if you want to drive, good luck, yeah. You fly, right? And I think it also makes sense in the bigger picture of like, what we said earlier, to really look at Mexico in combination with the North American tour, like if you go to California, You know, on the West Coast, you go East Coast, you know, like you go maybe to Canada as well, you know, so like I think then it makes sense. And for the, you know, the Mexican connection in LA, I was just in LA like 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, like after South by, and I met, you know, Nortec there, you know, Pepe Mogt. I always say like Nortec is kind of like the Kraftwerk of Mexico, you know, getting like really like Mexican or at least northern Mexican music combined with electronic music. And, you know, they played in front of a packed house full of Mexicans in LA, right? So, and I also think that of like, you know, there's a parallel to the Chinese market or Asian market maybe as well, because I think it makes sense to think of those, you know, to think as it's a global world now that we're living in. Meaning, if you are big in Mexico, for example, for whatever reason, then it extends to like, you know, the Mexicans maybe like living somewhere else. Same as with China, you know, like if you go into the Chinese market, which is already huge enough, but then, you know, like Chinese people are living everywhere, you know. So it's really like it's an interesting ping pong game sometimes, how it works with our global world, you know.
There's also a thing that I would like to mention. It's about festivals. We do have a really good circuit of private festivals. There's a lot, starting from Marvin, and he said
it was 52 pre-pandemic.
Exactly. There, you have it. Plus, the public festivals. That the public festivals, there is a challenge with it because the program public festival usually change within the governmental periods and stuff, but there is a lot of them. At least there is one public festival in each state, there are 32 states, with good money. They will pay for the tickets, like for the airfares. And that gives the bands the opportunity to build then a tour that it might be they might work best for the band's interest, because there are a lot of these public festivals that they don't really work on the marketing side. Like the festival would not do, if it's not Cervantino, or which is like the biggest public festival, that they do quite a good job in communicating about the artist. The rest of them, they don't usually do, but there is an opportunity that will get you into the country. So that's something that it should be taken into consideration.
It's interesting with me. I went to Corona Capital, which like Corona is in the beer, not the virus, and you literally don't have to stand more than 30 seconds before someone's trying to sell you a beer. It was incredible. It was just like being in a huge boozer with some music in the background. But it is impressive. It's the first time I've been at a festival where you can buy a fresh fruit salad, and you know, that's another thing that's a kind of advantage there with the different food that's available is a kind of cut above the catering here. But I think that, you know, we've mentioned Marvin quite a lot. They actually,
yeah, but there are other festivals.
But it's worth mentioning them because we've also got a partnership with them now. They've got something called Marvin Gateway, which is a streamed festival. Last year it was streamed to something like 1 million people, and that goes via their Amazon Music channel. And what's interesting with that was we got 5 of the Y Days acts this year have been selected to have their performances showcased on that. And I think that they have also put together, Philipp alluded to, a little touring circuit now. So there's cities close to Mexico City, I mean, within a 4-hour drive or something. So you don't just play the one show. I think it's also, I mean, everyone talks about flying with Mexico, and I'm a bit like, you know, when I went to FinPro, there was a discussion about maybe doing something on sustainability, and when I asked how I should get there, they said, "Oh, you should fly." But I tell you what, Mexico has the best buses in the world. You've got these really posh buses, and you can work on them for, you know, even to Guadalajara. I quite enjoyed it. It took like 7 hours, but no one bothered me, and I could just get on with work, you know. So it is, if you're a DJ or you're traveling really light, then that is also something worth considering. I mean, I guess there's one thing that, you know, there are obviously the stereotypes about Mexico being ultra-violent and everyone's taking crystal meth or coke.
Yeah, that's right.
And you know, as you can see by our panelists here, you know, and the thing is that I think it's important to kind of dispel that. I've known more people robbed in Barcelona than I have in Mexico City in the past 20 years.
There will be things like, when you mentioned going from Mexico City to Tijuana, yeah, you have to fly because you don't want to cross the desert.
You wouldn't survive at the desert.
Exactly. I
was going to add that.
It's the same thing, but we wouldn't go even if we are not carrying equipment. I mean, going through the desert where there's no cities within kilometers, it makes it dangerous. Yeah, that's true.
So don't go through the desert.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to add something real quick. Google Maps and Drive, the Waze, they both have like the drive you take is like open. They take you through little alleyways and little stops that are actually pretty dangerous. So I honestly am the first one to say I wouldn't recommend touring in vans because the highways in Mexico are pretty difficult to navigate if you are not from that territory. So obviously, in my suggestions, always consider Mexico as part of your North American tour, not your South American tour. That's another thing, completely different. But I would definitely suggest going from Mexico City to Guadalajara to Monterrey and then to the U.S. via plane as much as possible because, yes, some buses are really cool if you are traveling as a solo traveler or as a delegate or networking. But if it's with a band and you have equipment, I would definitely suggest flying because it's messy.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, I think are there any other sort of tips like that, practical tips that
for
you would... just for general, and someone's going to Mexico,
you can start reading country profiles. Malfi does a lot of them for this kind of events. I write one of them,
actually, I just
which is going to be completely in English next year.
Anna and I actually did a whole panel with our friend Chuck about how you all the cultural things you should be aware of for, you know, Brits going to Mexico, but also vice versa. So you can see that on our Wide Days YouTube channel if you need some extra info on that. But there's a whole range of things you should be aware of, but it's pretty easy to, you know, do those or not do them depending on what the case is. Now, I know that there's radio is still really strong in Mexico, and I thought it'd be worth broaching this subject. There's an artist on, well, I did a 2-hour, I was a guest on a friend's radio program, and we did a 2-hour special on electronic music from Scotland, the history of electronic music in Scotland. And he told me afterwards that it's got a listenership of something like 3 million people, and I was like, wow, you know, that's like 3/5 of the population of Scotland. And I think it's worth touching on that. How does radio fit into the overall promotional mix, and you know, what kind of opportunities are there to get onto radio here?
Malfi, did you do radio outside Guadalajara in Mexico City?
Yeah, I did radio on the entire, I researched radio on the entire territory. And actually, Anna, this is something that we need to add to the next research because there's another communication issue with that data. The majority of the consumers of radio in Mexico are from older generations, which is millennials to older. So the problem is there's a 94% of people listening to radio in Mexico but the minority of the listeners are between Gen Z and younger. So if your project is really, really young, like TikTok driven, it probably wouldn't be important to put it on the radio. But the numbers are really confusing because, yes, there is a huge amount of people listening to radio, but it's older generations. And it's provincial places, which is outside of the city and outside of specific, key cities in Mexico. So, yes, it's big, but it's not as profound in a strategy as it should be, especially because I don't want to be quoted on this, but there's something called promotion in radio, which probably will come out of the label's budget, So, and as Anna said before, it's like paid up front. So as an emerging artist, I'd rather suggest you look for the niche stations like Ibero, like Reactor, like UDM, UDG, all these university radios, but not expect to be played on, as, for example, stations from your part of the territory, which like college radios are like really cool and pretty massive indie radio stations. Here it's a little bit smaller, but don't get distracted by the numbers because it's a little bit confusing if you want to use the amount of people that are listening to the radio, but the amount of people that are listening to actual independent or indie or alternative or whatever music, it's really small.
So yeah, it's worth mentioning the universities have got radio stations, so that's it's different to what you have here, where the radio stations for universities, perhaps like Justin Lee on the campus or something over there, is broadcasting to really quite substantial areas as well.
I want to say something about TikTok, because now that she mentioned TikTok, I want to say that it's a huge platform for things. Because lately I've received like more than 5 requests of brands that they say, we want to sing this song. That is a super unknown song, unknown artist, but it's becoming viral, and the brand really likes it, and they say, I want this on my ad. So that's a very big... Before it will start charging, now it's free, and then in the future they will need to pay. The band will need to pay to be on TikTok or Instagram or so on.
Has anyone got any questions? If there is, Amber's got a mic, so just wait for the mic to come down, Andy.
Hello, is that, yeah. I was interested in what you were saying about importing records, and I wondered whether is this something you're doing a lot? Is the cost not quite prohibitive if you're importing boxes from Europe or any other part of the world into Mexico? And then obviously there's import duty to pay as well, isn't there? For you then to sell that record at retail, does that not escalate the price a little bit too far if you're not dealing with a distributor and importing en masse?
Sí, si no te sale demasiado caro si estás importando directamente de las disqueras y no va por un distribuidor.
No, the only cost is the freight. It's around 7% of that depends on the volume. But if it's more than $1,000, I need a custom broker, and I have to pay the tax for advance. Case in Mexico, the IVA, the value added tax, the VAT is 16%. I have to pay it, but in advance. But right now I'm working with FedEx. They charge me around $173 for made the customs. They do it directly. It maybe is more like $5,000. I go to a broker, but maybe I have to add to the cost of the label of the distributor of about no more than 25% in the worst scenario. So they are arriving with good opportunity.
But that's on top of the cost of shipment.
Shipment plus customs, yeah.
So have you considered setting up a distribution network of your own for Mexico, given how many 120 record shops in Mexico?
That's the number. It was the number for last year, but not all of them are in the same situation. And he was saying he doesn't sell CDs and he doesn't sell used vinyls. Some of those stores do that.
Big market.
They are like used vinyls.
Yeah. No, it's just because when I was trying to persuade my UK distributor to send my records to South America, where I was seeing from SoundCloud, I was getting a lot of play and interest, including DJs who were asking me for the material. They said it was very difficult for them to send the records to South America. And I think maybe it was to do with getting paid. I can't remember what they said now. That's a few years ago. But they weren't able to service that part of the world for me.
Malfi's got something to contribute to this.
You do distribution, Malfi?
Yeah. I also was part of Record Store Day for previous years. And the reason why the distribution is not able to cater to all the stores is for two reasons. First, the record stores, or most of them, the amount of money that they're able to pay up front for the albums, it's really limited. They're only allowed to only buy 4 or 5 or 6 copies. They only have the budget for those. So for the distributors, that's not a business because they need to cater to much more than that. So the problem was that the distributors are limited with the amount of copies that the stores ask for. So what it happens is that each store has their own contacts. So there are a lot of stores that go directly with the label. There are ones that are part of the distributor. There are ones that actually buy through other stores. So some stores get together and they make they join. Yeah. So my suggestion in this case, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I would suggest direct contact with the stores as part of the strategy because it is tricky. Yeah.
So then there is an opportunity for someone to set up a distribution network in Mexico and deal potentially exclusively with UK distribution companies. No one's doing that at the moment. That's basically what you're saying to me.
No one. And it actually could be a great idea because it could cater to other labels. So there you go.
I think the advantage of Mexico is we have a free trade commerce with Europe, with Great Britain, with Canada, with US. But by example, the records for Argentina, they come very expensive because they have a tax to go out of Argentina, and the country who receive also tax it, so they elevate.
I think that's what the distributor said. It was too expensive. I think that's what they said.
But keep in mind, right, that Mexico is not South America or Central America. It's North America. So they're part of the free trade agreement with Canada and the US. So it's perhaps worth speaking to someone who is in the US. I mean, Neil Semple from the Department of Business and Trade is here, so he can perhaps advise you on how this new trade deal with the Trans-Pacific might influence this as well, and how that might feed into it, because Canada and Mexico are part of that as well. You can pass the mic.
Yeah, we've just agreed to accede to the CPTPP, which Mexico and Canada are part of, and also we are updating the Mexico Free Trade Agreement, which we inherited from the EU, and those negotiations are ongoing. But I think it's an important point to make in services, which music largely is, and goods, which we're talking about here. We're talking about a situation that's going to be, liberal. Obviously, negotiations are always very challenging, but I think in the areas we're talking about, I think there's a great desire to, particularly in areas that affect music, to make some good progress in this agreement.
I'd also say that in my experience, I find the British consulate, well, British embassy in Mexico City, the ambassador is a massive music fan. So you'll see pictures of him on LinkedIn with the Arctic Monkeys and stuff like that. And with Trocker, yes, more importantly. And, you know, I had about half a dozen meetings with different people from the embassy and the consulate in Guadalajara, because they're the ones that are more responsible for creative industries. So, you know, really you'll find that people there are really in the British embassy. Most of the ones I met were actually Mexican, or there was even a Colombian woman. But I think it's really worth highlighting that the British Council also has a presence in Mexico City. They're more, it's kind of hard to define what they're actually after in that respect. So my trip there was supported by the British Council in Scotland rather than the Mexican side of things. But if you're in certain types of music, then they will be interested. And there is an artist called Paua, and she's released on Chris Knight's label here in Scotland. So there are all these kind of elements where she got support from the British Council to perform in London, and I think quite often it's kind of got cumbia traces in it. So there's those elements where, yeah, there's a lot of things where, yeah, your jazz or something that's more sort of, let's say, traditional in the loosest sense, so cumbia or, you know, these jarocho cultural stuff rather than business stuff. So the kind of sweet spot is to kind of engage Neil and the British Council, and then you end up with something like this with all these guests, you know. And I think that's you know, it's really worth mentioning those kind of opportunities there for more niche genres. I went into it was a vegetarian restaurant with a record shop upstairs that was all dub and reggae in Guadalajara, and I went in and mentioned the Scotch Bonnet records, and the guy was like, "Oh yeah, Mungo's Hi-Fi. We had them playing here a few years ago." And he showed me, and like right at the front of the rack was a Mungo's Hi-Fi single. So for those of you who are interested, we set up a WhatsApp group for music professionals and artists in Scotland, Wales, and Mexico. So if you want to join that, let me know, and we can add you to that. So it's all about, you know, sharing releases. Well, I was going to do, I did start on LinkedIn, but Mexicans don't really like LinkedIn, most of them. They're obsessed with WhatsApp, which is fucking infuriating if you lose your phone in a Guadalajara cantina with your entire WhatsApp history. So when dealing with Mexicans, make them email you stuff and tell them you're not on Instagram, because it's like so much business. People try to do so much business on Instagram, and it's a real pain in the arse. So avoid WhatsApp and direct people to email, and then you'll have a very happy life. But also, if you need to chase people, do it on WhatsApp, because that's it. I think that's unfortunately got to be the note to close on here, but really grateful for our panelists. They are around for the duration of the event, so come and speak to them while they're here, and see if you can make some magic happen, and go to Mexico. It's great. And finally, I'd really like to thank Neil here, because he did make this happen, and it's the first time we've ever partnered with first time we've ever partnered with the Department of Business and Trade, formerly known as the Department of International Trade, which is what it was when we first started talking. But ultimately, the important thing is that we get trade and exchange with our Mexican friends here. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.